Great. So thank you very much, Sue, for the introduction, and thank you very much for inviting me to come and talk today. I'll just put it into slideshow mode. So just to start off with a declaration of interest. So I've no declarations of conflict of interest, but also I just want to point out that I've not been involved in any policy decisions regarding the UK vaccination programme. It has been done through NHS England and the Joint Commission on JCVI. So this is a rough timeline for COVID and COVID vaccination. The first index case was reported in Wuhan in December 2019, and then the first case came over to the UK. And then on the 16th of March, the UK was in lockdown. Trials of vaccines began around April, the beginning of April 2020, in particular trials of the Pfizer-BioNTech vaccine. And by the end of November of last year, we had the phase 3 trial results, which demonstrated that the vaccine was safe, but also very effective in terms of preventing COVID. And on the 7th of December, the MHRA approved the Pfizer vaccine. But pertinent to pregnancy, when they approved the vaccine, they said that pregnancy and breastfeeding were a complete contraindication to the vaccine because pregnant women were not included in the vaccine trials. So the recommendation from the JCVI was that women should avoid pregnancy. They shouldn't be given the vaccine if they're pregnant or breastfeeding, and should avoid pregnancy for up to 2 months afterwards. The second vaccine was the AstraZeneca vaccine, which was approved on the 30th of December. And in just a 1 month period, there was quite a sea change from the Joint Commission on Vaccine and Immunisation. So they said, actually, theoretically, there is no harm in giving the vaccine to pregnant women, but we don't have any human safety data. They said that the vaccine could be offered if the woman was high risk from COVID or had a high risk job, such as a healthcare worker or works in a care home, for example. Also, they said that it can be given in breastfeeding. Again, there isn't any obvious reason why the vaccine would not be safe in breastfeeding, but there is no safety data. So that was quite a big sea change just before New Year. And then on the 8th of January, MHRA have approved the third vaccine, Moderna vaccine. So who are the JCVI? Well, it stands for the Joint Commission on Vaccine and Immunisation, and it's an independent advisory committee that advises on vaccines, the scheduling of vaccines, and also the safety of vaccine. In England and Wales, it has a statutory role, but in Scotland and Northern Ireland, they may choose to follow the advice. They don't have to follow the advice of the JCVI. As you may well be aware, the JCVI split people into priority groups, and that was according to their age. So the most at-risk group are in group 1, and these are residents in a care home, elderly patients who are above the age of 80. As you go down the list, the risk from severe disease or the risk from mortality from COVID decreases. The vaccine schedule, it's recommended that it's given in 2 doses, and you'll be very aware of the controversy regarding those 2 doses. In the trial, the doses were given approximately 3 to 4 weeks apart. But because the need to vaccinate a large number of people as quickly as possible, that schedule has been increased in the UK. And the JCVI do not give a sort of preference, one vaccine over the other, so they're all equally as efficacious at preventing COVID. So which pregnant women can be vaccinated? So I said that, so pregnant women, if I just go back to this slide, come in this group 2, so they might be frontline health and social care workers, or group 4, so the clinically extremely vulnerable group. And this is the vaccine information sheet that we've produced. So a number of different bodies, including the RCOG, the Royal College of Midwives, UK Teratology Information Service and the Macdonald Obstetric Medicine Society, we got together to produce this information sheet for pregnant women. And basically it says that you can have the vaccine if you are either at high risk of exposure, so you're a health and social care worker, or you are at high risk of severe illness if you get COVID. And this is this CEV group, the clinically extremely vulnerable group. And this is an enlargement of that. So the clinically extremely vulnerable are well defined by the government and basically include conditions such as organ transplant, people undergoing cancer treatment, people who have had transplants, stem cell transplants with significant lung disease, et cetera, et cetera. So people who, if they got COVID, would be severely unwell and or at significant risk of mortality from COVID. And it includes all those above conditions. There is a catch-all, basically. So the list is, there are some very significant conditions. So that, for example, if you've got a kidney condition, you need to be an advanced kidney condition. So they say stage 5 kidney disease or on dialysis. So that's a fairly extreme condition. But there is a catch-all that your hospital doctor or GP feels there are other reasons why you might get more severe illness if you develop COVID-19. So there is a kind of a clause there that says if your doctor feels that you're at significant risk from COVID, then you can also be entitled to the vaccine. I'll just put this up because UCOS, the UK Obstetric Surveillance Survey, have been gathering data about pregnant women with COVID. And this is one of their most recent studies looking at women admitted to hospital with COVID, hospitalised between March and August of last year, so over a 6-month window. And just looking at the risk factors of women who are admitted, you're more likely to be admitted to hospital with COVID if you're overweight or obese, so there's a 2-fold increase. There's a 6-fold increase if you're Black, and 4-fold increase if you're Asian or other ethnic minority groups. So, and also a 2-fold increase if you have medical comorbidities such as diabetes or hypertension. So one question is whether we are indeed prioritizing the vaccines to the most vulnerable, given that there are certain groups within this who seem to be even more at risk than having had a medical comorbidity. So when you see patients and you talk to them about the vaccine, how do you go about the counselling? So one way to approach this would be to talk about the benefits of the vaccination and then to talk about the risks. So the obvious benefit from the vaccination is that it protects you against COVID-19. So that being said, most pregnant women will only get mild symptoms from COVID and will not be hospitalised. However, you're more at risk from COVID if you are in your 3rd trimester, if you have other medical comorbidities, particularly if you're in the clinically extremely vulnerable group, if you're obese, or if you're from the BAME group. The benefits of vaccination, well, it's 95% effective in non-pregnant women after 2 doses given 3 weeks apart. So we know the effectiveness of the vaccine, but all those trials were just in non-pregnant women. So unless pregnancy changes your immune system somehow and you're not so responsive to the vaccine, which we don't think it is an issue, then the benefits of the vaccination is good immunity. Another potential benefit is reduction in transmission to other vulnerable people, although we're still gathering data on this. Although in the last day or two, there has been some developments in terms of saying that people that have been vaccinated are less likely to have positive COVID swabs, so less likely to be asymptomatic carriers of COVID. However, this reduction in transmission is still needs to be proven. But it figures that if you're vaccinated, you're unlikely to be passing the disease on. So what are the risks of vaccination? Well, vaccines were not tested in pregnant women. So all the trials excluded pregnant women. We know something about it, however, from animal data. So there was the vaccines have been tested on pregnant animals, pregnant rats, and no significant impact on their fertility, no increase in the anomaly rate of the pups, and no pregnancy complications. So this is reassuring, but you can't necessarily take animal data and apply it to human data. But the other reassuring feature about the vaccines is that they are non-live. So the vaccines do not contain live COVID, and we have a lot of data on other non-live vaccines, such as pertussis, whooping cough, and the influenza vaccine, which is given every year. All non-live vaccines are safe to give in pregnancy. There is no data showing any harm from any other non-live vaccine. And there's no reason to suspect that the COVID vaccine will be any different to these other non-live vaccines. You may well be aware that the COVID vaccines often utilize new technology. So using mRNA and perhaps using a vector virus to give the mRNA. And that kind of technology hasn't been tested in human pregnancy. So there potentially is a small risk of an unknown or an unforeseen problem. And that's why, really, in order to justify giving the vaccine, there needs to be a risk from COVID-19. So that's the kind of justification for giving it only to those people who are either at occupational risk or potentially, if they caught COVID, would be at significant risk of disease. When should we be vaccinating pregnant women? Well, actually, there isn't any advice about this from the JCVI. From a pragmatic point of view, and me with a sort of teratology hat on, it seems sensible to avoid the first 12 weeks of pregnancy if you can. However, you might argue that in certain people, becoming vaccinated and becoming immune straight away are very important. For example, if a woman's got cystic fibrosis or a very bad chest, you might say, well, actually, it's really important for her to be vaccinated as soon as possible, even if that's within the first 12 weeks. But generally speaking, after 12 weeks, the baby's formed and the sort of risk of it causing congenital anomaly is substantially diminished. So it makes sense to vaccinate after 12 weeks, and also to try and vaccinate before the third trimester when the risk is greater. Do you need to delay pregnancy? So if you get the vaccine, you're not pregnant, should you delay? Well, the old advice was you needed to wait for 2 months after vaccination before becoming pregnant. However, that advice no longer stands. So you don't need to delay pregnancy if you've been vaccinated. There is this funny thing that if you go for a vaccine and you don't think you're pregnant, have the vaccine, and then you discover that you're pregnant, the current recommendation is to wait until the pregnancy is over, until you get your second dose. But to me, that doesn't really make sense. Essentially, you've had the first dose, and you may as well vaccinate the second dose because you've already exposed the baby to the vaccination anyway. And why not, give the woman a good immunity into the second and third trimester? So I don't really agree with the recommendation that you need to wait until the pregnancy is over. Breastfeeding. Initially, again, breastfeeding, it wasn't okay to give the vaccine to breastfeeding women. But after the change of heart on the 30th of December, it is now okay. And this is because it's very difficult to imagine why the vaccination would somehow cross over into breast milk and cause a problem for the baby. It's so unlikely that would happen. And there are huge benefits, as we all know, to breastfeeding. So in line with recommendations from the USA and the World Health Organization, we've come around to the idea that it is safe to give the vaccine to breastfeeding women. So this is a big one. So does vaccination affect fertility? And many of you will be aware of rumours that are going around that the vaccine causes sort of infertility. This is a screenshot, and this is where this kind of rumour came from. So this is a screenshot from Facebook, and it says, the headline here, head of Pfizer research says, COVID vaccine is female sterilization, which is such a sort of bold and unlikely to be true statement. First of all, the person making the statement, Michael Yaden, actually left Pfizer about 10 years ago. So he's not head of Pfizer research. He worked for Pfizer research, but he wasn't the head of Pfizer research, and he doesn't work for Pfizer anymore. So the first part of the statement is untrue. If you go on to actually read the post, it talks about the vaccine containing a spike protein image here. But the vaccine doesn't contain spike protein, it contains mRNA. So again, that's not true. And then the theory is that because the spike protein shares a small sequence of amino acids that's similar to a placental protein, you might form antibodies to the placental protein, and that might cause infertility. This theory has absolutely no evidence to support it. There is no supporting animal or human data to suggest that symptom 1 is degraded by antibodies. And women who have had COVID are still getting pregnant at the same rate as they were before. So this bold statement, COVID vaccination is female sterilisation, you kind of know is going to be untrue. However, misinformation spreads very quickly. And one does need to bear in mind the need to anticipate adverse events. And I present a scenario to you is that a woman maybe receives the vaccine at around 20 weeks, and the next day she goes into premature labour. And somebody else, maybe in the same trust, has the vaccine at 24 weeks and also goes into preterm labour. And then the media report that the vaccine causes preterm labour, and the story is shared on social media. And you can see how potentially people might link unconnected adverse events to the vaccine, and that might precipitate these misinformation, particularly on social media. So how are we going to try and counter this? Well, what we need to know is what the rate of preterm birth is in women who haven't been vaccinated and compare it to those who have. And how do we do that? Well, what we need is data collection, and it's really important that we gain data about the safety of the vaccine in pregnancy. What we're hoping to do is, so we're working very hard to create the system whereby when you get vaccinated, this gets recorded on the digital system that they're using for vaccination called NIMS, which feeds into NHS Digital. And then when you have your baby, data about the maternal outcome and the neonatal outcome also goes to NHS Digital via the electronic healthcare records. And what you then need to do is link the vaccination to birth outcomes. And if we do that, then we can have a weekly update. So we can tell the number of women vaccinated, the percentage of whom had a healthy baby, and we can look at adverse events. And the adverse events that we'd be interested in would be small for gestational age, preterm birth, stillbirth, and congenital anomaly. And then we could benchmark those adverse events against a matched cohort of women who haven't been vaccinated, and in that way create a safety dashboard. The other thing that we can look at is, because the efficacy of the vaccine hasn't been tested in pregnancy, is linked to positive swab test results, again through NHS Digital. So this kind of digital way of doing vaccine surveillance is our preferred method. However, it will take some time to set this up. And the biggest stumbling block at the moment is getting the people that have made this computer system flag up that the woman's pregnant. And you wouldn't believe how difficult it is actually to get that done. I've just had news this week that it's definitely in progress and an absolute top priority, because we really need to know how many women in pregnancy have been vaccinated. It's so important for any analysis that you do thereafter. As you will be aware, we've been vaccinating pregnant women for about a month now. And there is a temporary reporting system in place through this group called Vaccines in Pregnancy, which is part of Public Health England. And perhaps we might be using UCOS to stimulate more reporting of vaccine. I don't really want to talk about this in great detail at this stage, because I'm hoping that the digital system will just take over and that maternity units won't be burdened with the need to report pregnant women to UCOS who have been vaccinated. And this comes from the Cumberland Report, which some of you will be aware of, a report into the use of sodium valproate, vaginal mesh, and a hormonal pregnancy test. All of those caused harm either to the woman or harm to their baby. And one of the biggest things that they identified from that report was system failure. So the failure for collecting data, unable to assess efficacy, unable to assess complications, and no systems in place to analyse or react to data. And this report only came out at the beginning of last year, and here we are giving vaccination to pregnant women with now really a good system at the moment of collecting the data and no good way of really assessing for complications. However, I'm confident that we are going to change that, and because of the way the vaccine programme has been rolled out, i.e. in a hurry, I think that's one of the reasons why this hasn't really been thought through properly, and that we're still playing catch up really in terms of getting this data collection sorted. But the good news is that we're now all collaborating. So we're all working together as a group under the RCOG COVID-19 Vaccine Working Group. And our aim is to provide up-to-date information and guidance, to set up and maintain a monitoring system, and we're lobbying the UK government to do this, to report outcome data, but more importantly, to support women to make informed decisions about vaccination and to support you as healthcare professionals and midwives looking after these patients. So what do you need to do now? Well, I think you need to familiarise yourself with who can be vaccinated. And just to go through that again, it's women who are at high exposure from their occupation, so healthcare workers, social care workers, and women who are in the clinically vulnerable group. Those are the only two criteria of women who can be vaccinated at this point. Now, that might change in the future as the vaccine programme continues. I think we need to be talking to women in the antenatal clinic, and I'll show you where the RCOG leaflet is that we've produced in a minute. We have a monograph on the UK TIS website about non-live vaccines in general, so that might be reassuring to some women. We may be asking you to report until we have an automated system. But the other important thing that we need to be doing is supporting the vaccine centres and the GP practices. Often these are staffed by clinicians that are not used to talking to pregnant women and not used to explaining benefits and risks. And certainly I've had a lot of queries from people saying, or a lot of reports of people saying, well, pregnant women are being sent away from the vaccine centres because they're not happy to give the vaccine to pregnant women. And I think in all those circumstances, I've said, well, have you gone and spoken to the lead clinicians and offered your services? Because I think that there are groups of pregnant women. There are ones that definitely won't get vaccinated under these circumstances, and there's ones who are very worried about COVID and take up the vaccine. But there's quite a lot of women in the middle who need extra support and extra counselling, really, in order to talk through the pros and cons. I would just want to switch my screen. This is the RCOG website, and there's the coronavirus pregnancy and women's health. Click on that. Then click on COVID-19 infection and pregnancy. And then if you scroll down this page, there's vaccination and pregnancy. And this is the information sheet that we've produced, which is just taking a minute to download. This is about who can be vaccinated, the options for pregnant women, the criteria for meeting the clinically vulnerable group. It talks about the benefits of the vaccine, which is what I've outlined, and the risks of the vaccination, including side effect risks. So this is the information sheet that we think is good for pregnant women to help them make the decisions they need to make.
Thanks for watching this video from the Maternity and Midwifery Forum. For more expert opinion and analysis, hit the button below to subscribe.